Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. I'm Dr. W.F. Strong. I'm your host this week, and our book is American Spartan, The Promise, the Mission, and the Betrayal of Special Forces Major Jim Gant. I want to share with you, before we begin the actual interview, what Petraeus had to say about this book. He said, American Spartan is a riveting, powerful account of the service of Major Jim Gant, a man seen by many of us as the perfect counterinsurgent, and inspiring, a gifted, a courageous leader who had a nuanced understanding of Afghan cultural and tribal dynamics, and he was willing to take extraordinary risks living among Afghans in remote locations, far from friendly bases. Said ultimately, however, one of Jim's strengths, a willingness to push the envelope, became his undoing. Ann Scott Tyson, our author today, had a ringside seat to observe it all and takes us there in this extraordinary, gripping book. That was said by General David H. Petraeus about Jim Gant, who is the American Spartan. Ann, how are you this morning?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Well, thank you for joining us. This is a keep you up all night sort of book. You can't stop reading it because rarely do we get this kind of insight into the struggles of the men working on the front lines in dangerous places.
Well, thank you so much. I've been real happy. I've heard that a number of times, that people can't put it down, and obviously that's a wonderful thing to hear for an author.
Well, before we get to Jim Gant, who is the American Spartan, I want to talk about you just a minute. You yourself have been in many dangerous places. You've been a war correspondent for a long time, and you've seen more firefights than many soldiers have seen, correct?
Yes, that's true, and it has affected me. It changed my life, and I, at the same time, feel privileged that I was able to be on the ground, and I felt it was my duty and responsibility to get as close to that as possible, so that the great sacrifices of all the people involved would to some greater extent come to light.
Now, you were in Iraq and Afghanistan, and was Iraq the first time you ever saw combat?
Yes, it was. I was in the invasion of Iraq in 2003 with the 3rd Infantry Division, which is the Army unit that spearheaded that whole invasion. And I realized at the time that there was just a vital need to have people there, independent observers, to watch and report on what had happened. After that, I kept going back. I spent many months with different Marine and Army units in all over Iraq and then also Afghanistan, watching how the situation deteriorated, and then in Iraq, watching how it turned around, at least for a period of time, and that was a very good thing to see Iraq stabilized, at least for a period of time.
What is it like? Is there any way to describe to the civilian what it's like to be in the midst of an honest-to-goodness firefight?
Well, it's obviously it's. I wouldn't say frightening. It was something that I guess every second I had to try to calculate what to do, and I guess that as a civilian, what I found very useful to me was to stick with one particular member of the unit. It's very chaotic. You have to make split-second decisions, and I have been on the ground and come under direct gunfire, and it's a very uncomfortable experience when everybody else is running and you're trying to figure out what to do. So I would just dive down, start doing my job, start filming usually, and then when the unit would move, I would move around with them. And again, I found it very useful to stick close with one member of the unit, as one Marine sergeant put it, just stay in my hip pocket. And that's sort of what I did to make sure that I didn't get separated, and that I certainly didn't become any kind of a hindrance to the unit as it was in the firefight.
Mm-hmm. So going on to Jim Gant, he was serving in Iraq also, but you didn't know him at the time, right?
No, I didn't know him at the time. I was traveling back and forth. In 2007, however, I was offered an opportunity to interview him over the phone. He had been in a major battle. He was leading a U.S. team that was advising an Iraqi police unit. He had been in a major battle and was awarded the Silver Star for his valor in that battle. And I was offered an opportunity to interview him, which I took by phone and wrote a story about this very complex ambush that he had fought his way through. But we didn't meet then. In fact, we didn't meet for many years after that. But I did have that experience interviewing him.
And you were, at the time, working for the Washington Post?
Yes, I was working for the Washington Post at that time.
So then you interviewed him, and you became quite obviously impressed with his background, his valor, and the title of your book, The American Spartan, is revealing about him because, as you said, he was very much attracted to the ethos of the Spartan warrior.
Yes, he was, and his teams had the name Spartan, based on the ancient Greek culture that sort of revolves around warriors and training their young boys to become warriors. And he used those same beliefs to inspire his men. The stories of the Spartans that he would tell them, and how they would commit to dying for one another, all of the effort that they put into their training, that they were true warriors. And he used that also in his connection with the Afghans, because they are also a warrior culture and are similarly honor bound to fight for their group and their tribe. And I was very impressed when I met Jim. And one thing that impressed me was not just the big battle that he had been in and the valor and bravery that he had shown, but it was his detailed understanding and knowledge of the Sunni and Shia religious sects in Iraq and the dynamics between them. He had studied Arabic. He clearly understood what was driving members. I mean, his Iraqi police unit was primarily Shia and operating in the Sunni areas, and it was really that cultural awareness that sort of stuck in my head. And so years later, when I heard that he had written One Tribe at a Time about Afghanistan, I was interested in that and spoke with him again and wrote an article about his strategy for working with the Pashtun tribes in Afghanistan. And it was only sometime after that I met him in person for the first time when he was assigned to Washington, D.C. to study Pashto again before he deployed.
So he was somewhat of an unusual soldier in that he really wanted to understand the depths of the culture and how those value systems impacted everything about their lives.
Very much so. I mean, that is the mission of our Green Berets, the special forces within the Army. That is their core mission, to work with indigenous people. They're one of the few forces that is trained in language and specializes in different parts of the world. And I had been with teams of Green Berets before, however, and Jim's passion for that mission and his commitment to it and the lengths that he would go to understand them truly went beyond anyone I had encountered in my decade almost of covering the military. So it was their mission, but he just was carrying it out on a different level.
Well, let's talk about Petraeus just a second, because Petraeus was the golden boy in relation to Iraq. He invented the surge and really saved Iraq from going into complete chaos at the time. And then he tried to bring a similar strategy to Afghanistan, and there it would not work because Afghanistan was a different cultural mix, right? Well,
there were a couple of aspects of the strategy. Afghanistan, on one hand, I mean, the one part of the strategy that was very successful and I think decisive in turning things around, at least for a significant period of time in Iraq, was that they recruited the Sunnis, who had been the core of the anti-American, the insurgency efforts, to fight with the Americans, because in Iraq, as you recall, there was really a pretty much a full-fledged civil war between the Shias and the Sunnis, the sectarian struggle that was going on.
Yes, I remember.
So when the Sunnis shifted sides, they were policing their own areas, and that was also raising local forces, neighborhood forces, tribal forces, to fight the more radical insurgents there. That worked there, and I think Petraeus, in coming to Afghanistan, saw the potential for a similar strategy. Now, Afghanistan is very different in that it's decentralized. It's never had a strong central government, and the tribes are quite strong there. So this was a very good plan for rural parts of the country that had not really had many forces in them, and yet where a lot of the insurgents were hanging out and having sanctuary. So recruiting the tribes was a very good idea. One thing that was, I would say more different about Afghanistan is that it's much less developed, and again had not had as much of an infrastructure, as much of a central state control, and the idea of building a nation in Afghanistan was maybe a bridge too far, that we could actually build a strong central state and that would be able to survive. That has yet to be seen, but that was a very, very ambitious mission.
So Jim Gant had a plan, a theory, a thesis that he wanted to execute, and Petraeus liked it, right?
Yes, Petraeus read One Tribe at a Time very early on, and told me directly in an interview that he was impressed by it. He was so impressed that he asked all of the commanders in Afghanistan, including the top commander at the time, to read it. And it was instrumental in his thinking because it's so well articulated, this local bottom-up grassroots security effort, that he then went to Afghanistan and put in place at the national level a nationwide plan to recruit local village and tribal forces to defend their areas against the Taliban. So he liked it very much, as did other senior officers.
Well, here's what I found astounding. I guess it's my ignorance about military bureaucracy, but he had approval from the highest levels to go to Afghanistan and execute his plan, and yet mid-range in it, or midway, he gets stopped by leaders or military commanders in Afghanistan itself who don't like it. So I didn't know that people lower down the chain could buck people higher up the chain like that.
Well, one thing that did change, Jim made an extraordinary time commitment to Afghanistan. He felt that you really needed to stay for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, the same guys on the ground, to carry this out. So most soldiers are only deployed for a year, and with special forces it's around 6 to 9 months. So he was there for about a year, and Petraeus and other very supportive senior commanders, they rotated out, and a new group came in. A new group came in that was more risk-averse, that had a different concept of the mission, and that was more wary of Jim personally, and perhaps somewhat resentful of the great support that he had from the senior people. And they were not willing to give him as much leeway, although they clearly recognized his expertise, and they did give him, at the end, one very, very challenging mission, but in general, no, they were not supportive of his his expansion plans.
I think the greatest compliment that comes to Jim Gant through through this book is Osama bin Laden pretty much putting a hit on him. They found in Osama's papers. Describe that for us. What did they find?
Well, when Osama bin Laden was killed in May of 2011, there was an extensive search of his living quarters, and in his personal quarters, they found a copy of One Tribe at a Time, Jim's 2009 paper. And there was some writing in the margin that matched bin Laden's writings. And at the same time, there was a directive that they uncovered from bin Laden that Jim should be killed and removed from the battlefield. And the reason, I agree with you that this was a demonstration of the impact that he was having. Mm-hmm. Clearly, both al-Qaeda and the Taliban identified the local police strategy of recruiting tribal and villagers to protect their own areas was very threatening to them, because it could take away from them key sanctuaries, such as Konar province on the border with Pakistan in the east, where Jim was so active. And the United States was concentrating its largest forces in the surge to Afghanistan in the south. It was critical that they hold on to the east, and at the same time in Pakistan, al-Qaeda and the Taliban were coming under heavier drone strikes. So they needed to hold on to that area at the same time that Jim's strategy was giving them problems. So I agree. It was sort of a backhanded compliment yes. that that even Osama bin Laden had realized the potential of his mission.
Well, I think one of the reasons is that, that's what Osama was doing, wasn't it? Wasn't he trying one tribe at a time, kind of, because he lived in tribal ways. He had great respect for the tribal warrior.
Yes, he did come from a tribal background in Yemen, mm-hmm. and he would dress in a way that showed his respect for the tribes, and he understood that. He understood the power of the tribes and was using that almost in a propagandistic way. So yes, I agree with you that, and I suppose you could say that with his earlier presence and the presence of al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, that he was very, very aware of the long-standing role and power of tribes in that country.
He was also described by one of his superiors as the Lawrence of Afghanistan.
Yes, that's true. He never called himself that, but when he was given the mission at the time, Admiral Olson very wisely, again, he was the Special Operations Command leader, realized that we needed to have an in-depth knowledge of the local cultures and tribes at a very low grassroots level, and he had his eye out for experts, for men and women he felt could had that higher level of understanding, mm-hmm. and was looking for Lawrence of Afghanistan, Lawrence of Pakistan, Lawrence of different countries, and so they called him that, and again, Jim was very, very inspired by T.E. Lawrence, the World War I British officer who worked so closely with the Arab tribes.
I was impressed that Jim is such a voracious reader, that he reads deeply on these matters.
He is self-taught in many ways, and he reads the Quran. He reads old British accounts of the Pathan tribes as they were called by the British in Pakistan, and he reads very widely on the subjects that he's interested in.
Somewhere along this line, as you're getting to know Jim and he's getting prepared for his return to Afghanistan, you fall in love.
Yes, we did, and that was very unexpected. It wasn't something we were looking for, but at the same time, based on a lot of life experiences we had, in hindsight, it's easy to see why we were drawn to one another. We had both been to war. We had both been impacted by it. In some ways, we were very, very different from different types of backgrounds, and yet we were more similar than you would think. We were both adventurous. We were both risk takers, and we both were very passionate about our jobs. And it was strange because I really, after just a short time, I felt that I had known him for a very long time.
Well, every good war book needs a romance, so you have it.
Yes, it's and that our story, the story of how we did this together, how we met, and some of the pretty serious struggles that we went through at different junctures, especially after we came back from Afghanistan, are all laid out in the book in a way that I hope could provide some insights to other veterans. I mean, there are more than 2 million of them who have served in these wars, and who, along with their spouses and their families, are really struggling. And one thing that I've heard about the book, people's reaction to it, is just how honest it is, how brutally candid it is about the things people go through when they go to war. Something I experienced myself, something that I wrote extensively about, and then something that I found myself helping my husband with directly. And I hope that can provide some insight and maybe some hope for others who are struggling with the same things.
So he went to Afghanistan, and then you eventually joined him there in his work. And I think this is a little bit different than it would be if you were just I don't want to put it that way, but if you were a military wife of the traditional sort who did not have your background as a war correspondent. It would seem to be different to me, because this has some justification in that you were a war correspondent and you had this skill set that prepared you for this mission and allowed you to be, our eyes on the ground. You gave us a perspective that we couldn't otherwise have. So together, you lived along with the soldiers who, for all practical purposes, blended with the native population of the Pashtun tribe there, or at least that sect. And so tell me about your life there in the village.
Well, it was critically important, and Jim sort of paved the way for this, that I respect the tribal customs and culture, and the tribal leader he worked most closely with there, a wonderful man very wise tribal leader named Malik Norafzal. He let me know that I needed to, when I was there, I needed to live by Pashtunwali, their code of honor, and respect their customs, which I was happy to do, because I knew it was critical. It was critical for Jim that I do that. So I dressed in their clothing. I showed deference to Jim in a way that a Pashtun woman would. And through doing that, I found myself able to go into the inner quarters in Afghan homes and meet their wives and children, a place where no American men could ever go. Mm-hmm. So I provided that further level of connection to the tribe, and the tribe protected me. And Jim showing that trust in the tribe by allowing me to be there among them was just added immensely to the connection with the tribe and to the safety of his team, because he demonstrated a tremendous trust in them, and they knew how important that was, because one of the key tenets of the Pashtun belief is namus, which is you must protect the women in your households, and you must keep them safe, and that is central to the Pashtun sense of their own honor. So it really communicated something to the tribe. At the same time, they realized that I was an American woman, and they allowed me to sit in the important meetings and councils with the men. They knew that I was going to occasionally shift into another role, and that I trained with the team. I went on patrol with them. So they understood that I was different, but they also understood that I really respected them and their ways, and it was an incredible experience. They really accepted me.
Were they generally appreciative of the American effort there?
Yes, they were. They were, they knew that not all Americans had treated them the way that Jim did, but they were very appreciative of his work with them and the development that he brought to the village, the formation of the local police that gave their local men jobs and an opportunity to work in their village. I mean, people started returning from Pakistan to the village because they were able to work there, and they knew that security was improving, development was happening, and they really didn't want Jim to leave.
So your belief is that had Jim been allowed to pursue this particular strategy over time, and a few more Jims could have been successful?
I do. I believe that it absolutely could have expanded security significantly in that area, and spread from. I mean, he did spread it into a much more contentious area, and was having, to a certain extent, and was having success there. So I absolutely believe, had he been allowed to capitalize on the momentum, that it could have really, really helped and gone much farther than it did in that area. Again, it's not going to overnight, create a stable Afghan government, which is one of the weaknesses, but I think it would have created security based on what was traditionally possible in Afghanistan.
Well, I tell you, it's an impressive read. I wish that we had another hour, but people are just going to have to get the book to get the full story, because there's great cultural intricacies to be studied here. And as often seems to happen in times of war, you'll have someone who has seemingly the silver bullet, and it gets taken away by people with less insight and less understanding. So I appreciate you coming on and talking to us about this. It's a beautiful read, and you give us insights to war that very few of us can otherwise get. So thanks for joining us. The book, again, is The American Spartan, The Promise, the Mission, and the Betrayal of Special Forces Major Jim Gant. If you cannot hear all of this right now, then you can get it on our Facebook page, Good Books Radio on Facebook, and you can listen to it as a podcast there. Thank you, Ann.
Thanks so much. It's been great talking with you.
Have a great day. Signing off, I'm Dr. W.F. Strong, hoping that all your books are good reads.